So a lot of people have been asking me, what exactly is happening in Gaza? Some of them are angry, some of them are disappointed because it seems as if Iran has excised and has forgotten the people of Gaza and the people of West Bank and the people of Palestine generally. They seem to not even be talking about them as much, as they have been talking of other members of the axis of, of the fighting axis that are supporting Iran and that are working with Iran to essentially free the peoples of the Middle East. Let me explain the facts, and then you can make your judgments as at this material time as to what exactly should happen and what you think is actually happening with respect to Palestine, with respect to West Bank, and with respect to Gaza. As of when the war started back then on February 28th, when the Americans and the Israelis, when they made an incursion into Iran, unalive those they were unalive, and have been fighting in Iran for the past 40 days, before the ceasefire eventually happened. The start of the American Israeli incursion into Iran actually met Gaza in a state of uneasy calm. Uneasy calm in the sense that, like I always say, when the Israelis and all Americans actually do a ceasefire with any entity, except that entity has overwhelming power, has powers over them that remains after the war, that they can continue to use to leverage them, to actually keep them in check, to actually control them if they want to misbehave, and to actually encourage them to adhere to the terms of the ceasefire. If that does not obtain, what usually happens is that you will find a situation where it is the other force, the weaker force, that seizes, while America and or Israel continue to fire. When it comes to America and Israel, that is the definition of a ceasefire. The other entity they are fighting is the one that actually ceases, essentially surrenders, stops fighting, stops firing missiles or drones or whatever, while they continue to what? Continue to fire, continue to unalive people, continue to wound people, if possible, continue to kidnap people, take them captive and things like that. That is what has been happening in Gaza since then. Low grade, not large numbers, not like 100, 120, 150, 150 per day, definitely, but almost every day, Israel will find an excuse and always find a way to unalive somebody in Gaza, or to wound somebody, children, women, civilians. It makes no difference to them. That has been the extant culture. So that was the scenario all through the course of the 40-day war. Now, in return, unlike the other members of the resistance, the folks in the resistance in Gaza and the West Bank did not fight back, did not fire anything, back at Israel. Understandably, because like I told you earlier in one of my videos, they are the weakest entity in the resistance group at this time. They are the most weakened, not dead, not taken out, but essentially weakened, the most weak. So it is understandable if they don't, fire back. So it is all the other members of the resistance group that have been doing the firing and that have also been taking much of the brunt in terms of casualties of being unalived and being wounded. That is the status quo. However, that is about to change. Why is it about to change in Gaza? It is because, you see, the so-called board of peace that the President Trump set up to manage everything about the not so ceasefire in Gaza stipulated that in 60 days that the resistance in Gaza must surrender their weapons completely, disarm completely, and not just that, surrender to them an accurate map of all the tunnel systems that are under the ground in Gaza. Again, like America and Israel always does, their goal always is to ensure that the opponent disarms. Usually, they don't want a fair fight. I shoot, you shoot. No, that is not the best case scenario. The best case scenario is that I shoot and you have nothing to shoot back. And I continue to shoot and I never stop shooting. Do you understand what I'm trying to pass across? It's not a fair fight scenario. They don't want a situation where it's going to be an effective scuffle, as in scuffle. Even if what you're shooting at them is by far much, is by far lower in intensity and strength and power compared to what they're shooting at you. They don't want that scenario. They want a scenario where you are completely demilitarized and disarmed. You are not capable of firing anything back, even stones. And then all they get to do is for them to keep firing at you whenever and wherever and under whatever circumstances they so wish. And that is why they always push, not just for so-called ceasefire, where you will cease and they will continue to fire. They also continue to seek a scenario where they will disarm you completely. Disarm, demilitarize, take whatever you can use to fire back at them, no matter how low grade. So that is also what they are seeking in the Palestinian front, in Gaza, in West Bank. That is exactly what they are seeking in Lebanon, in the scuffle with the Lebanese resistance, and that is also exactly what they are seeking in Iran by asking Iran to essentially, down their tools, shut down their missile production systems and drone production systems, and essentially render themselves completely vulnerable, to attacks, by the Americans and the Israelis. Now, the deadline for the so-called voluntary disarmament of Gaza, of the resistance in Gaza ended yesterday, actually yesterday night. So, and the Israelis have threatened that because the Gazans have not disarmed them as in themselves, which is perfectly understandable. Who would do that? Who will essentially render himself or herself completely vulnerable to the enemy with little to no pressure? That it was always a non-starter. The Israelis are saying that they are now going to come into Gaza, and they're going to resume that very brutal war that went on for 2 years, since October 27, 2023, afresh. If and when that happens, you can be sure that it is not likely that other members of the resistance group led by Iran will sit and, calm and continue to enjoy the so-called blood and the gore. It is most likely going to happen that the other members of resistance will rise up, will almost always want to, either protect the people in Gaza and the West Bank, or try to exact some sort of military revenge on Israel. As a result, that will result in the essential dissolution of the current ceasefire, and it is not unlikely that the battle starts afresh. And this time around, will most likely now include, the axis of the resistance groups in Gaza and in the West Bank. So it will most likely happen that all of the resistance group will now be fighting Israel and America together in whichever territory they are at the same time simultaneously. If a ceasefire now happens after them, it will most likely now be a general amnesty that will now include all the members of the resistance group, including and especially the Gazans and the West Bankers that you guys have always looked out for, that you guys have always asked questions about as to has Iran actually abandoned the folks in Palestine or not. That is my idea. That is my theory. What do you think? Let me have your thoughts on the comment section. Thank you for joining me on this video. Again, don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe, to toggle the notification button so that you can always have access to our videos, and to comment as usual and ask your questions. Thank you very much for joining me on this video. Have a good day.